Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we're going to do my full review and discussion of the Cold Steel Airlite. Now, this is meant to be not a bit of a departure, maybe not a huge departure, but when we think of cold steels, we think of knives like this or perhaps like this, which are, large, heavy duty, sort of tactical style folders. And I love those kind of folders. And for that reason, I'm a huge Cold Steel fan. They don't perhaps emphasize the small lightweight EDC stuff quite as much, although they do have a number of models that I think fit that role pretty well. There's the Working Man and the Pro Light, and some really budget models out there. You've also got the Broken Skull and the American Lawman. The Broken Skull, by the way, in Andrew Demko's video where he discusses the Airlite, he kind of gives the Broken Skull some credit for being the inspiration for this knife, which, I think is interesting as well. And so, they very specifically set out with this knife to do something that was going to be lightweight, slim in pocket, very, very carryable. So, I've got to say, my initial thought on this, and if you're just looking to kind of get some quick information, they really have hit what they were aiming at. Okay, now there's a lot more to say about this, and there's some other things that need to be considered here, but I think, overall impression, yeah, Cold Steel tried to make a really carryable, lightweight EDC folder, and I think they've done a pretty good job in that regard. Now, getting into some of the details, the other thing, I guess, they kind of talk about it being a little bit, on the budget end, and that one I'm not sure if I can get behind so much. This was, I think these are like $80 or $85, somewhere in that range, which is not really budget range. And so we'll talk about that as well as we work our way through here. So let's begin with size and weight. Overall, this is 8 3/16 inches. All right, so just a little more than 8 1/8. The blade itself is 3 7/16, so just a hair under 3.5 inches. We've got 4 3/4 inches on the handle when it's closed. All right, now since we're talking about the closed handle, let me point out this is really, really thin. It's less than 3/8 of an inch, so it's closer to 5/16, but it's not quite down that thin either. But this is a very, very slim knife, and that's one of the things that is highly noteworthy about it is how slim it is, and also how light it is at 3.1 ounces. So very slim, very lightweight folder, but still quite capable. And that's where I think this really, really shines. This knife is very slim. You really don't even know you have it. But because of the triad lock and because of the overall solidness of the construction, this is a very confidence inspiring knife. So it really can get a lot done for you, and it feels like it can get a lot done for you. It's a full size knife, but it carries like it's not even there. So in terms of, and I guess I should mention grip area. We usually talk about that now. That's 4 inches. So you've got quite a bit of real estate, even if you have very large hands. So this is not, I don't know, it's a full-size knife for sure, but it definitely feels like and carries like a very small knife. All right. And that I can definitely appreciate, and I can see, the appeal to someone who, really, really likes the strength of the triad lock, really likes the capability of Cold Steel knives, but wants something a little more carryable. I think this is a pretty darn good option. And I don't know for sure. You can, let me know down in the comments, but this is probably one of those thinnest knives that they have, and probably one of the thinner knives that you can get out there. So if you want something really low profile in pocket, I think this shines in that regard. Let's go ahead and work our way through this knife, beginning with the blade, the way that we always do. So this blade is AUS 10 steel, drop point, sort of a high flat saber grind there. We've got dual directions on the grinder satin, which is very, very nice. In terms of the edge geometry and the overall blade construction, I would call this very, very balanced. Okay, this is not a knife where they said, hey, let's just make this, paper thin and make it slice like crazy. It's not a knife where they said, hey, let's make this super heavy duty and make it, just a giant tank of a thing. They've really tried to strike a balance here, and I think they've done a pretty good job. You can see the blade stock is not super thick there. It tapers nicely toward the point, and it's reasonably thin behind the edge. I have cut up some apples and stuff like that with this, and it does the job. Does it do the job as well as your, I don't know, your paring knife in the kitchen? Well, no, but I've often said for an EDC, I really don't want a paring knife. Could they have improved that by going with a full flat grind? Possibly, and that would be an interesting option to see. And I've got a I'm going to share a wish when I get to the comparison portion of this video, and you're going to have to wait for a minute till we get to that part. But I do have something to say about the conception of this knife and some minor tweaks that I think could take it to a whole new level. All that said, overall, I like this blade quite a lot. It is AUS-8 steel, and Cold Steel seems to have done a pretty good job. I did not sharpen this. I purposely, and this is something I'll usually do in working toward a review, is I will not sharpen the knife at all. Try to do all kinds of things I can do with it, and then see if it's still holding an edge. And then often right before I make the review video, I'll sharpen it just to get a feel for the steel. And I have touched this up a little bit, but I purposely went, from the time I bought this, I went for like a month without doing anything at all to it, just using it for all kinds of work and trying to see how this steel holds up. Now, I know that's not as scientific as Cedric and Ada's testing. I'm not going to go and send this off to be Rockwell tested. I'm not going to cut miles of sisal rope, but I will say in my use, which was pretty frequent. You got to keep in mind, this is a very lightweight knife, so it works great for, those days where you're wearing a pair of track pants or a pair of those thin workout pants or something like that. So I carried this quite a lot, and I have to say, used it for all kinds of different tasks, and it is very, very sharp. Okay, it has held an edge very nicely. So, however that translates to, comparing to other steels and stuff like that, it seems to me that Cold Steel has done a pretty good job with this AUS-10 steel. In fact, they used to do a great job with their AUS-8 steel. I'm glad they changed, and I was way happier with the CTS XHP. S35VN is fine. I wish they were still XHP, but what can you do? But this AUS-10 in some of their budget stuff, I think, is another good option, and allows them, I think, to come in at a lower price point with these, which is nice. So, and I say lower, not low, by the way, on purpose. But yeah, I like the AUS-8 steel. For me, it has done a pretty good job. And I had a lot of, I tried to look around and see what people were saying about it. And a lot of people have been very, very happy with the AUS-10 as heat treated and finished and stuff by Cold Steel. In terms of lockup and deployment, well, no big, oh, by the way, while we're talking about the blade, I should come back and say this is also available in a Tanto version, which is going to be significantly different. And so obviously, all of my comments are going to be based on the drop point. Okay, so lockup and deployment. Well, I've got to say, lockup and deployment is pretty good. It's a typical triad lock knife. I can't flick all of my triad locks, but this one I can flick open pretty good. The thumb stud is decent. You can see how it's adjustable here, and the knife is ambidextrous because of the lock and the fact that there's a couple of clips that come with it, but I will say I enjoy the deployment on this knife. It's pretty quick. It's pretty easy. Typical triad stuff. If you're going to do it one-handed, you got to kind of get your finger up there, stop it, and then do the flip around and close it like that. Otherwise, you're doing the two-handed back lock type of stuff, which we're all used to doing. Because of the size of this knife and because it's fairly maneuverable in hand, I feel like this is a completely safe and easy way to open and close it. And this particular triad lock is not the stiffest one I've ever had. It's not as nice as the 8010 or the Formax, but it's also not as stiff as my American Lawman, and a couple of my Broken Skulls were fairly stiff as well. And it's sort of somewhere in between. So reasonably comfortable is what I would call this particular triad lock. Okay. The one little complaint I do have, and it's not a big deal, is I would kind of wish, all right, that there were just a teeny bit more space between the handle right here and the thumb stud. So I can get it. And normally I kind of come up the knife forward like this, and so it works fine, but every so often I kind of forget and I go to grip it and I feel like I can't get a hold of it very easily because the handle there is so close to the thumb stud. It's not a real problem in the sense that it really bothers me or I have ever had a problem deploying the knife or anything like that. But if you think of, if you look at this and compare it to some other options, Okay, so there's that one. Now look at something like the Recon 1. Look how much space I've got there. Look at the American Lawman. Look at even the Rat Model 1, the 8010. You know, so that gives you, hopefully, if you've got one of these knives, you have an idea of, you know, how these feel to deploy, and you can compare it in your mind to this one. And I'll bring some of these back in for comparison. Just wanted to show you where that thumb stud lands. Okay, moving on to the handle. Okay, handle construction is very good. I really, really like these all G10 knives. G10 is a very strong material, and I think it just makes perfect sense to lighten up a knife by going with all G10 construction, which is what they've done here. We've got a G10 backspacer here as well, and a very, very slim knife. By the way, there is an extra pocket clip that comes with this, so you can set it up for left or right hand tip up carry. All right, I can get a little bit of flex out of this, but very, very minimal. And in hand, and when I'm cutting stuff and doing work with this, it does feel really, really good. The jimping here is pretty aggressive, enough that I really feel like I'm confident when I'm holding the knife. So all of those things in terms of construction and ergonomics, I think it does a pretty nice job. The other thing I've got to give it some credit for is, you know, they've gone really, really thin here, and that makes it, you know, there's definitely a trade-off. Okay, so a knife like this is going to be insanely comfortable, right? And if you look at, you know, a bushcraft knife that's specifically designed for getting a lot of really hard cutting done, you'll see an even fatter, almost broomstick style handle on it, okay? And so, yeah, of course, a bigger, thicker knife that's more rounded is going to be more comfortable, but the trade-off is it's much more noticeable in pocket. So something like this, being as slim as it is, very, very minimal in terms of in fact, you could carry this and not even know you had a knife, especially at the 3 ounces. Now, does that mean it's going to lose a little bit of comfort? Yes, it does. But let me say, for how thin this knife is, it is very, very good. All right. Now, while we're talking about this handle and we're talking about thinness, and before, or I guess as we sort of transition into comparisons, right, this is not the first time Cold Steel has done something like this. So I've got here the American Lawman, and if I put them side by side, you can see the American Lawman is about 3/8 of an inch thick, while this guy is, you know, about a 16th under that. All right, so it is slimmer. The other knife that is very similar dimensionally in terms of this width here is the Broken Skull. Very, very similar once again to this knife. And they did a pretty good job with these two as well. And here's my one of my little complaints here. There's a difference, okay? This is more comfortable in hand than this. Now, part of that is, you know, the shape of the handle and stuff like that, but they've gone really thin with this too. But because of just that extra 16th of an inch and a little bit of chamfering, this is a little more comfortable, okay, than this guy. And the Broken Skull, I would argue the same thing. All right, now when we come to this comparison, and of course these two are very, very close, okay? I think this probably weighs, you know, 3.8 ounces or something like that. So it's not even an ounce more. You're getting a little more cutting edge here. So here's my discussion, my wish that I wanted to get to at the end. So if what you were trying to do with this knife was to design a drop point Broken Skull, you could have just tweaked the Broken Skull a little bit to make it a drop point, kept the full flat grind. The Broken Skull is a spectacular knife, and it's so slim and so effective with that full flat grind and that super slim long blade. It's a great knife. And so I would have really loved to just see Cold Steel reintroduce a knife I already adore, that I just think is a fantastic knife, but with a different blade shape. That would have been fantastic. I don't know, maybe they've got some kind of a deal, or, you know, maybe Andrew Demko's scared that that whoever the designer is, that big wrestler, is just too scary, and so he didn't want to mess with his design. I'm kidding, but is it Steve Austin? Hopefully, I'm saying hopefully Steve Austin is right. I don't really follow wrestling. My kids would be super ashamed of me right now because they're right into it. But A redesign on the broken skull would be amazing. That's such a perfect knife, and just making it a drop point blade, maybe changing the way the belly works on it just a little bit, would have been very, very welcome and would have been made a really, really cool new model. So Cold Steel, if you're ever watching this, I like this, but I don't like it as much as I imagine I would like a variation on the broken skull. All right, so that's what I would, if you were trying to, when you were inspired by the broken skull, you weren't inspired enough. I would have liked to see this be basically a broken skull with a different blade shape, and maybe tweak the handle a little bit to accommodate that blade shape. Okay, now, so that's the first comparison I've got to come to, is the broken skull and the American Lawman. Now, here's the other tough pill to swallow with this knife. All right, and that is, if you go and do some comparison shopping, the broken skull on White Mountain Knives is like 85 bucks, 86 bucks. The American Lawman is about $100, and the Code 4, all right, is 89 or 77, well, and 79. So the all of those knives land in, the 80 to $100 price point. Okay, so $100 is stretching it a little more for the American Lawman. All right, but the Broken Skull and the Code 4 are both in, I guess, CTS XHP. I mean, sorry, are both in S35VN these days. If you could get a CTS XHP one, it'd be even a bigger win. But for about the same price as this, you can get a knife that weighs, less than an ounce more, has better steel, and is a little more comfortable in hand. All right. So to me, that's a real challenge, and that makes it very, very difficult to put this knife out there as just the best lightweight EDC option you could possibly think of. Because honestly, if someone said, should I get this knife, I'd say, hey, this is a good knife. It's absolutely a great knife, in fact. It's performed extremely well for me. It's super easy to carry. It's fantastic. But it just feels it feels high at $79. Even if you take, $8 off with your 10% discount from White Mountain Knives, it's just a bit much for me. I feel like this knife would have been great at about $55, $65. So the value for me is the biggest challenge, especially when you compare it to some of Cold Steel's other options. The American Lawman, as I said, is $100, so that's $20 more. This is easily my most recommended knife, just in general. Okay, so it's going to be hard for anything to compare to it, but the Broken Skull and the Code 4 would also offer compelling challenges to this knife. Now, let me grab a couple of other knives just to give you a good idea of size. So there it is beside a Rat Model 1. I think everyone's familiar with the Ontario Rat Model 1. That should give you a good idea of size, as well as this guy, Paramilitary 2. Again, similar idea there. I'll throw in another lockback from Spyderco. So there's the Manix 2 lockback, and I love this knife. And look, you can find these for pretty cheap, because for some reason people didn't like them as much as I did. I still think, I would argue every day, that this is the best version of the Manix. I know they didn't sell well, and so they're discontinued and not available anymore. But you could, for a while, and probably still can, pick these up for around $80. Even brand new, you can find some really good cheap ones for under $100. All right, finally, let's throw in those other two Cold Steels. So there's the Recon 1, obviously a totally different animal. And lastly, my favorite Cold Steel, the 8010. Okay, so get those out of the way and give you my overall conclusion on the Cold Steel Airlite. Did Cold Steel hit what they were aiming at? Absolutely. Did they deliver a lightweight but highly effective everyday carry knife? Yes, they did a great job with that. Now, and if you're really concerned about the ounces, okay, the other knives that I offered in comparisons do weigh more, right? So the Broken Skull, the American Lawman, the Code 4, that are all very close and closely priced, they all weigh more than this by, an ounce or so. Let's say all those are around 4 ounces and this is 3 ounces. So yes, I've got to give credit. They made this slim and light, and that's really, really impressive. And if that's the main thing that you need, this is the option you should go with. Okay, it really is lighter and easier to carry than those other options that I mentioned, and it's every bit as capable, or nearly every bit. I get the steel is not quite as good and it's not quite as ergonomic, but it's so close that yeah, it makes perfect sense if you're really concerned about having something really, really lightweight. All right. Um, if you know, the other thing is, I know the broken skull is a little bit too big and a little bit too scary for some people. So has Cold Steel delivered a functional lightweight folding knife that's fantastic for EDC? Yes, without a doubt, they've done a really, really good job. I don't love the value on this knife. That's about my only complaint that I can really offer, other than, you know, there are a couple little hiccups here that I'm not totally in love with, but overall it's a great knife. There's a couple little things that I don't like, and the value's a little off. But if you love this design, and if you want something that fits the description I've been giving you, super lightweight but super effective, then this is a really, really good knife. If you don't mind adding an ounce or two, and if you don't mind adding $10 or so, then there are probably some other knives that I would recommend. All right, there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Go over to White Mountain Knives, pick one of these up. You can save yourself 10%. You can also save 10% on some of those other knives I mentioned, the Broken Skull, the American Lawman, the Code 4. And you know, that's a win-win. It works. It helps the channel out big time. It also helps you out because you get to save 10%. And it helps Justin because he gets to sell a few more knives. So thanks a lot, guys. That's my thoughts on the Airlite. I would love to hear your feedback down below. We'll talk to you soon.